welcome back to The Wrinkle and a segment that we're calling, Is This Normal? This is part 2 of talking about normal stool. So I'm going to tell you about a way that you can be a bit more informed when you're talking about your stool. Why is this important? Well, looking at stool, and you know we all do it, looking at what has come out into the toilet in a solid way can give us a lot of information about how quickly things are moving through your colon. This could be helpful when you're going to talk to a healthcare provider about your bowel habits. Maybe you want to talk about what your stool is looking like, but you're having a hard time kind of describing it. I'm going to tell you about a tool that you can use to just be a little bit more literate about what your stool looks like. And you might also find out what the shape of your poo can tell you. So let me start by telling you a little anecdote about a party I went to a couple years ago with some colleagues, medical people, nurses and doctors and other people in the field. And one of my colleagues, another geriatrician, made these amazing chocolate truffles. So they were these sort of like a little sphere about the size of a big marble. They were rich, rich chocolate. And she had made these herself. So she brought them in and kind of made sure everybody had one, and then went around and said, "Oh, did you have one? Were they good? Oh, great. Well, now that everyone's had one," she said, "I can tell you what they're called. They're called Bristol balls." Bristol balls. And she thought that was hilarious. The rest of us kind of groaned. If you work in healthcare, you know why we groaned. She thought it was funny to make a dessert that looked like something that belongs on the Bristol Stool Chart. I'm going to insert a picture of the Bristol Stool Chart here. So this chart was developed by some specialists in gastroenterology in Britain in the late 90s. They actually took 60 volunteers who were omnivores, as is how they're described, and they were kind enough to volunteer to keep track of their stools, including weighing them and collecting them and describing what they looked like for a few weeks. And then these subjects were also either given a laxative or something to slow down the gut transit. And while the subjects were doing this, it was really helpful for the researchers to be able to look at a stool chart which shows the different shapes of a stool, and they were able to then determine how that correlated with the gut transit time, or how quickly things went through the body. The way they determined the transit time was by giving the subjects radiopaque pellets. So these were pellets that they were able to see by studying the stool, so they could see how many of them had gone through the body. So they were able to correlate how quickly things were moving through the gut with what the stools looked like. Why is this information helpful? Well, you know, if you're going to see your doctor, you might want to describe whether you're having a type 1 stool. This is some putty, by the way. It's like silly putty that I borrowed from one of my kids. And if your stool's this color, then that's a concern. Maybe you should stop eating birthday cake icing. But this is just putty here. So if your stool is like this, type 1, that might mean that you are constipated, and you should think about getting more fiber or looking at your medication list and seeing if there's anything on there that's constipating, like certain types of antidepressants or tranquilizers or other compounds. Could be making you produce type 1 stools. Type 2 stools, these are a bunch of little balls that I made earlier, but this is what a type 2 stool might look like. So it's really just kind of all those little balls squished together into kind of a form, and that could indicate constipation as well. If we squish this together a bit more, we would get a sausage that kind of has some cracks in it. That's type 3 stool. It is looking a lot like a sausage, but it might have a few little cracks in it. Type 3 is usually easy to pass, and that usually indicates a pretty normal stool. So if we take our stool sausage and make it smoother, and it's kind of funny, in a lot of these Bristol charts it's described as looking like a sausage or a snake. Mine is green, so it looks a bit like a pickle. But this is, again, this is kind of a healthy stool as well. It's easy to pass. It's got a form. This is what's considered normal on the Bristol Stool Chart. My putty's kind of drooping. Now, if you end up getting some blobs with clear-cut edges, so it might look a little bit like this, then that might mean you're tending towards diarrhea. So again, these little blobs are easy to pass. They have rough edges. They're not those firm balls like you get in type 1 or type 2, but that might indicate that your transit time is a little bit quick and things are moving through a little quickly. If we're getting a mushy consistency with those ragged edges, so it might be something like this. It's hard to get ragged edges with this kind of putty because it's sort of a smooth polymer. But if you're getting like a mushy stool with ragged edges like that, then that might mean your transit time's pretty fast. So again, it might, for some people, they might feel like that's diarrhea. And finally, number 7 on the stool chart is more of a liquid. So you can see that this polymer, it actually, if you leave it in the container long enough, it does kind of liquefy and just takes on the shape of the container. But that would be number 7, where where the stool is pretty much just a liquid, which is pretty easy to describe because we all know what a liquid looks like. So the next time you get up from the toilet and take a peek at what you've left behind, maybe pull up your Bristol stool chart and see where you're at. I don't want you to get obsessive about the shape of your stool, but you know, there is something that your poo could be trying to tell you. It's always good to learn a little bit more about our bodies and our health. I hope this was helpful. And I'd love to hear what you have to say about the stool chart, whether you use it in your day-to-day life or you have any familiarity with it. And I'll see you next time on The Wrinkle.